Welcome to Review Nation, and it's that time of the month again where I give you the best metal albums of March. I couldn't compile that top 20 list that I usually give you, narrowing it down to 10 albums this month. There hasn't been much metal for me to really enjoy, to be honest. Some bands just follow other bands, sort of the same monotonous shit over and over again. I want something different, something I haven't heard before. Today I'm going to give you my top 10 albums. So let's kick off with the first album, number 10, and it's White Stones, and the album Kurarahi. I don't know how you pronounce that, but yeah. This album is really good. Marta Mendes, who was also the bassist of Opeth, this is his band, and he's put out a pretty good album. It's got that Opeth sound, quite progressive, but yet there are some really good moments throughout. Worms is a great song. I really enjoyed JC, that's a great song as well. The guitar, some really nice guitar moments throughout this album. This album feels raw, but yet dynamic. It's got a very different production, not as refined as the other albums I'm going to mention, but White Stones stays in its lane. You could say there's elements of death doom throughout this album. It's just a great album. His vocals are intense as anything as well. I love his growls. I love the different ranges he can get, and yet this album is very stylistic in its approach. Coming in at number 9 is Crystal Coffin, The Transformation Room. This album is a through and through black metal album, but it's got elements of maybe melodic death metal. There's some really nice moments throughout this album. I love Ride Through the Night, that's a great song. Transitional concept to this album as well. This album really flows. At times it's very clean, but it's also got that classic sound. Production, on the other hand, is pretty good, and I really love the tone of the drums. His vocals, though, are intense as anything, and I love the growls and fries and highs he gets throughout this album, and it's just the intensity. It just feels very atmospheric, this album. One of the best albums of March. That's why it's at number 9. So coming in at number 8 is Sicarus and the album God of Roots. This is a chaotic black metal album. Wow, his vocals are amazing. They really are. His range is incredible. You can get to those low, deep growls. This album is, again, quite atmospheric. I love the guitar work. Some amazing drumming. The fills throughout this album is out of this world. The drumming is insane. I love how prominent the bass is throughout this album. Some really good songs like Immortal of Plight. That's an amazing song. I love the title track as well. This album is intense. If you like black metal, you're gonna pretty much love this album because it's the way the album flows. It's a pretty long album. It's around 56 minutes. Man, I just feel like rising higher because I absolutely love this album. So coming in at number 7 is something you've probably never heard before, and it's very experimental, and I love it and I appreciate that. And they produced a killer album as well, and it's Bogner and their album Why. So if you like electronic metal, you're going to love this because they incorporate elements of electronic. But this is a black metal album as well. Sort of an electronic black metal album, at times producing some pop beats. It incorporates some pop elements throughout, trap beats as well, and amazing drumming, but has also got the aggression that black metal has. This is a fantastic album. I love his vocals. His vocals are intense as anything throughout this album. It's got that staccato effect, and I love the stratospheric atmosphere that they provide. There are some really awesome songs to really sink your teeth in. They're very hard to pronounce, but track 2, my god, track 2 is an amazing. I think I might actually review this album. It's also got a very interesting instrumental track that reminds you of old Burzum. It's very ambient in tone, and I love it. But they incorporate electronic elements throughout this album, and he also sings cleanly. So I love this album. Bogner Why is a fantastic discovery. So coming in at number 6 is Dwarf and the album Gospel of the Vile. the band did actually see my review. They loved it. They really loved it, and I love the album. This is a doom metal album. It's a death doom album. Elements of funeral doom as well, but some of these songs are absolutely fantastic. I love like Rats, Gospel of the Vile. I love the overall lyrics and the guitar. It's very sludgy death doom, and his vocals are at times aggressive, but he incorporates those cleaner vocals. I just love the overall atmosphere Dwarf, Gospel of the Vile provides. This is a very interesting album. Again, creates an atmosphere. Like, I'm really picking some very atmospheric albums. Dwarf, Gospel of the Vile is one of the best albums of March. So coming in at number 5 is Thanatos and the album Violent Death Ritual. So this album is in your face, incorporating elements of black metal, black and death metal, and at times melodic death metal. It's interesting. It's a very interesting album. His vocals are intense as anything. Really reminds me of bands like Behemoth. Really reminds me of the vocals like Nurgle. I really enjoyed that. I love the tremolo pickings throughout this album, not to mention some amazing songs like The Silent War, the title track, As the Cannons Fade, an incredible song. This album's pretty quick. It goes around about 40 minutes. This is a very in-your-face album. I love at times how chaotic this album is, but also controlled chaos. Coming at number 4 is Neck of the Woods, the Annex of Ire. This is a multi-genre album, incorporate metalcore, deathcore, melodic death metal, bloody everything throughout this album, and I just love it. One of my favorite albums. I love the deathcore elements, the metalcore elements, the post-metal elements. It's just brutal, this album, and I love the guitar lead. The Annex of Ire is a very melodic song, but the Tower, man, has an amazing conclusion. That riff and the melody throughout the conclusion of the Tower is just fantastic. You will never get it out of your brain if you hear the Tower. I love how progressive this album is as well. It's very progressive. The different changes, signatures throughout some of these songs, but damn, it hits you hard in the fucking face. It's one of the best albums of March. Coming in at number 3 is Wake, Devouring, Ruin. Alright, so what can I say about this album? My mate recommended me this album. I listened to it, and wow, I absolutely fell in love with it. I really did. It's a through and through black metal album. It's a very atmospheric black metal album. This is probably one of the most atmospheric albums on the list at the moment, but I love it. It's crazy, and at times it's chaotic. And the vocals, on the other hand, are just magnifico. I love the vocals. I love the high shrieks. At times, he incorporates those low growls as well. This album does sound very different. And the drumming is one of the main courses, because at times it incorporates blast beats, but also incorporates some really slower tempo beats as well. And this is what's very different, something very dynamic in range, and that's why I love Devouring Ruin. Alright, so now we go to the worst albums of March, or maybe the most disappointing albums of March. And the most disappointing album for me was My Dying Bride, The Ghost of Orion. Yeah, I said it, a lot of people love this album, but to me, this is the weakest My Dying Bride album. I was so pumped, especially after hearing those singles, and I listened to this album, and man, I was so disappointed. I do enjoy this album, but it is the most disappointing album of March. All these songs, apart from Your Broken Shore, are just mediocre. They really are. And to see what the title track is just a 2-minute instrumental, and I'm not very interested. This album is boring. It's a boring album. It's a very uninspiring album. It's not ambitious at all. It's just a very boring My Dying Bride album. So we go on to one of the worst albums of March. It was Old Man Gloom and the album 7 and 9, Darkness of Being. Now, I heard this album once, and this was background music, and I heard this album the second time, and I hated it. I did not enjoy it. In fact, me and my mate were listening to this album, and he didn't like it as well, so we actually turned it off. We actually turned it off halfway through it. This album's pretty bad. It's a pretty bad album. Like, it's sort of got that doom element, post-metal element, but I don't like it. I don't like it. Don't like the guitars. There are some really weird sort of noises. Just sound like someone has dropped a bomb out of their ass. That's how bad it is, especially if you're heel to toe. That's a really bad song. Possession of the Wounded has the same sort of melody throughout the whole fucking song, and it doesn't really change at all. It's got the same monotonous guitar riff. This album is trash. It really is, and I fucking hate it. Old Man Gloom can go get in the bin because it's a terrible album. Okay, so coming in at number 2 is Temple of Void, The World That Was. This album was released late March, and I loved it. And the reason why I loved it is because it's Death Doom, and it's one of the best Death Doom albums of the year at the moment. Casket of Shame is just an absolutely fantastic song along The World That Was. But I love Single Obelisk. Single Obelisk is like a minute instrumental, but at times it's so damn soothing, and he incorporates really death metal growls, but he also incorporates cleaner vocals throughout this album, which you can't help but enjoy. This album is very dynamic, at times it's very experimental done in a good way, because this is definitely one of my favorite albums of 2020 at the moment. So there's not many honorable mentions, but here are some honorable mentions for March. Coming up number 1 is, no surprise for some of you, it's Code Orange. It's Underneath. This album is a fantastic fucking album. It really is, and the reason why it's a fantastic album is because it's a very experimental album, but it's also incorporating metalcore elements, industrial elements, and it's just a straight out fiery album. It really is. You think you know what you want until you're inside. Swallowing the Rabbit Hole, an incredible song incorporating different glitches throughout this song, and not to mention In Fear, You and You Alone, absolutely amazing songs, and Jamie's vocals throughout this particular album are fantastic, and Reba's vocals are fantastic as well. I love her vocals. The Smell, Autumn and Combine. I love Autumn and Combine. One of my favorite songs off the album, but then it gets better. This album gets better, and this album is chaotic. This is a chaotic album, but it's controlled chaos, and I love it. And this is a very fun album, and to end off the album is Underneath. This is basically the song that got me really into Code Orange, Underneath. I love it. I love Reba's vocals. I love Reba's vocals throughout this song. The chorus is amazing. It's the best album of March 2020 in my opinion. I absolutely fucking love this album. It's a great album. Yeah, so guys, comment below your top 10 March albums of 2020. So comment below the albums you are waiting for next month. So keep the discussion going in the comment section below. Subscribe if you want, and I'll see you in the next one.